In today's 1-hour special, I will explain the secrets of the most famous and biggest illusions ever performed on the internet. Starting with David Copperfield's flight over the Grand Canyon illusion. Magicians have always pushed the limits of reality, but this one went a bit too far. Copperfield begins by standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, peering through a telescope as if he's preparing for something beyond human capability. Then, he takes a deep breath, strikes a meditative pose, and starts to float. To prove that there's nothing holding him up, a ring is passed over him from one side to the other. But he doesn't stop there. He takes it a step further. 2 large rings pass through him, eliminating any doubts that he's suspended from above. Then we reach the big moment. Copperfield leaves the ground entirely. The vast landscape stretches beneath him as he glides through the open sky, effortlessly soaring over the Grand Canyon. For a brief moment, it feels like we're witnessing something impossible. A true miracle. And then, as if guided by an unseen force, he finally lands on the other side, where someone is already waiting for him. But despite how breathtaking this illusion looks, there's something very unusual about this performance. If you've seen any of Copperfield's biggest tricks, the Statue of Liberty Vanish, walking through the Great Wall of China, you'll notice one thing they all have in common, which is tons of spectators. Yet, this time, no live audience. The only people present were a camera crew and Bonnie Tyler. No random bystanders, no stage, nothing. Just a highly controlled filming environment, and that is the #1 giveaway that something's off. Because without a live audience, Copperfield can manipulate everything: camera angles, lighting, even the footage itself. And speaking of manipulation, let's talk about the actual levitation technique. We do see Copperfield rising from the ground, but let's focus on what's behind him, a curtain that's already suspicious, because if you look closely, the way he moves vertically suggests he wasn't floating at all. He was being lifted by a counterweight system hidden behind that very curtain. But here's where things get even more deceptive. The camera trick that made him fly, the real genius behind this illusion isn't the levitation, it's the camera angle. The camera intentionally limits the viewing angle once he is off the ground. Notice that we are only shown the front angle in a very controlled way. If you're still not convinced, look at the telescope in this close-up shot. A shadow of a rod moves across it, perfectly synchronizing with his vertical motion. But if this seesaw mechanism is assisting him, how did this ring pass over him? Well, that's where the camera angle once again plays a vital role. As the ring passes over him, a hidden hinge, positioned like this, opens momentarily to allow the counterweight arm to pass through before snapping shut. In this next phase, as he moves forward and passes through the second ring, the counterweight arm extends further, allowing him to move closer to the camera. However, the actual levitation over the Grand Canyon is where Copperfield decides to pull out every trick in the book. At one point, we see Copperfield passing through the ring from one camera angle, then a cut, and the next angle shows him higher up and farther away. If this was filmed continuously, why does the perspective change so suddenly? Additionally, you barely ever see Copperfield's face during the flight. This raises an important question. Was that even him? Since we never get a clear close-up of Copperfield mid-flight, then there's a good chance the person flying over the canyon was a stunt double. The reason we can't immediately conclude that it's Copperfield in a green screen set is that we can see a shadow on the canyon, confirming that someone is definitely being carried over it. The question now is carried by what and why a stunt double is being used. We do see wide shots where we can see that there's nothing below him, but there's always a limit on what can be seen above to maintain the levitation effect. This means the stunt double is certainly being supported by cables, similar to the levitation apparatus Copperfield used in his flying illusion. However, judging by the video quality and safety reasons, even if they used the kind of cables helicopter rescue teams use, which are practically invisible even in good lighting, those cables would still be undetectable. So, with this terrible video quality, they could hide anything. But still, why use a stunt double? If it isn't obvious already, dangling from a helicopter with hidden cables is incredibly risky, whereas a trained stunt performer could handle the physical demands and potential hazards much more safely. These wide shots conveniently obscure his face, making it easier to swap in someone with experience in aerial stunts. I know most of you are wondering about this close-up shot. How can we see Copperfield if a stunt double was being used? Well, these close-up shots aren't zoomed in. Instead, they're transitions between a wide shot and a close-up shot. This means Copperfield is using a green screen for these close-ups, filming them separately at a different time and integrating them into the stunt double's flying footage. His lighting, shadows, and even his outfit is slightly different, which means this part of the performance was filmed at a completely different time. Right before the final landing shot, Copperfield's stunt double is briefly seen before a transition occurs. In this setting, Copperfield is fully prepared for the landing sequence, which essentially uses the same counterweight arm method, but in reverse. Instead of extending outward, the counterweight arm is pulled back towards the curtain. The camera, which was capturing a close-up of Copperfield, slowly turns around to show his backside, However, he isn't actually moving, but rather the background's motion as the camera moves creates the illusion of his levitation. Once the camera is positioned directly behind him, the counterweight arm pulls him towards the curtain. He ensures he stands directly in front of it until the arm is completely pulled through and then ends the act. Eric Chien's most famous cards to coins act. Eric begins the trick by opening a small wooden box, inside which there is a long white ribbon. Using the ribbon, he divides the table into two halves, with the red cards on the left side and the blue ones on the right. Then, as he starts dealing the packet of red cards, they begin turning blue the moment he places them on the blue half of the table. In the process, even the color of his outfit changes from black to a dual red and blue design. He then takes the blue cards and one by one turns them back into red. Eric slowly places a blue card under the ribbon, where it gradually turns red. Lifting the ribbon reveals that the card has truly changed color, and pulling it back restores its blue hue. Next, he takes the red cards, and as he deals them, they vanish into the table. He picks up one blue card, and while pushing it into the red half, it vanishes as well. He then picks it up again, shows it, and restores it by moving the ribbon back. Eric then introduces a coin, and upon placing the blue card on the coin half, it suddenly turns into a second coin. He repeats this with the remaining blue cards, and they all turn into coins. Upon switching the positions of the coin and the blue card, the coins suddenly turn back into cards. He places his hand over the blue cards, tosses them to the coin side, and they instantly turn into a stack of coins again. In the end, he collects all the coins in the box, vanishes them, and his costume changes back to a black color. So how does he perform these tricks? Well, here's the secret. To make this act easier to understand, I'll explain each trick in the same sequence in which the act was performed. In the first trick, where he teleports the frames onto the table, he utilizes both sleight of hand and a bit of technology. You can see his left hand sliding the first frame off the table, and when it gets near the edge, he drops it behind the table into a savant, which is a bag that hangs behind the table that magicians commonly use to ditch or steal objects. This particular vanish is also known as the slidini vanish, whereas the frame he picked up with his right hand was vanished using the retention vanish, where the card simply gets pulled back into a tenkai palm position temporarily and then ditched. The moment the two frames appear on the table, if you slow it down, you can actually see they gradually fade in, and there is no visible mechanical mechanism involved. This is because they are not frames made out of paper. What you see here, in fact, is white electroluminescent tape. This tape is attached with an adhesive on the cloth. This explains why the tape has bumps and doesn't look like the origami paper frames he vanished. When he takes the ribbon out of the box and attaches one end to it, we notice something in the center of the ribbon that appears to be implanted inside it. This is a small neodymium magnet, which will be utilized to perform one illusion later in the trick. Next, he takes a packet of cards from inside the wooden box. The packet is organized so that the bottom half contains blue cards while the top half are red. While dealing the cards on the right side of the table, he deals them from the top, but then performs a bottom deal to switch out the red cards for the blue cards. In this move, the top card is pushed with the thumb, but then pulled back at the last moment as the bottom card is pulled out from underneath the packet and dealt. This gives a convincing illusion that the card was dealt from the top of the deck. You can see this happening if you slow down the moment he deals the cards on the left side of the table. The shirt change is fairly obvious if you slow down the clip, but the misdirection is very clever. He casually tosses the red card off the table while his left hand pulls one of the two layers of colored vests he is wearing. The original vest is black, over which he is wearing a half blue, half red colored vest, and on top of that is another black vest. This change is performed similarly to quick change acts, where the outfits are layered on top of each other. At the moment when he deals the single blue cards, one by one transforming them into red ones, he uses the snap bottom deal. In order to perform this move, you grip the cards like this and peel the card, hold the edge with your thumb and ring finger, slide the bottom card, and hold it. Then, you make a snapping sound as you let the bottom card go. It was at this moment Eric steals 3 red cards from the packet in his right hand and holds them in the snap deal grip. After executing the snap bottom deal, he ditches the blue cards here. In the next trick, where Eric transforms a red card into a blue one just by dropping it on the left side, he uses black art. There is already a plain card with a blue back lying face down on the black velvet table. Its face is entirely black, camouflaging it in plain sight. The moment he drops the red card on it and picks it up, he is actually holding 2 cards. When he slides it underneath the ribbon, he leaves the black art card behind. However, when he pushes it back to the blue side, he picks up both cards as one and performs a Bertram change, which works by stealing the bottom card, holding it in a tenkai palm, and placing it on the top card. Afterward, he turns it back into a blue card by ditching the top red card into the savant. He does this by simply letting go of the top red card as he tilts it towards himself and throws the blue card forward. You'll notice when he tilts the card, he accidentally flashes the black face of the blue back card, confirming our explanation to be accurate. Now comes the most impressive trick of the act, the slow color change under the ribbon. In order to perform the impossible color change under the ribbon, Chien used a cleverly designed gimmick playing card. There are 4 components used to construct this gimmick. The first is the base card, which is a single playing card that has no back design on it with the angels, as you would normally find in a bicycle back. Instead, it has one half-colored solid blue and the other solid red. The second component is a blue-colored playing card that isn't attached with any adhesive and can freely move back and forth, such that it can cover one of those colors entirely when positioned on one side of the card. Let's say it was placed above the red section. The entire card would then look like a solid blue-backed card. But as this piece slides towards the blue half, it starts to reveal the red color underneath. In order to secure this loose playing card piece in place, a second playing card has its back design completely cut out, leaving only the white border frame behind. This is attached with adhesive right on top of the base card, thereby securing the motion of this blue piece in place. But what about the back design? The back design is, in fact, a clear piece of plastic that has the entire bicycle back printed on it in white ink, which is exactly the size of a standard playing card and is glued on top. Therefore, this blue-colored piece cannot escape or fall out from the top either. It is now secured in between these 3 layers. Now, since this blue-colored piece is secured, how is Eric able to manipulate it inside? That's where magnets come in. The blue-colored piece has an extremely thin neodymium magnet implanted in it. These neodymium magnets are extremely thin and are commonly used by magicians to create extremely thin card gimmicks. The second magnet was implanted underneath the black velvet cloth of the table, such that as the card is pushed towards the right side of the table, the blue-colored solid piece gets attracted and remains stationary relative to the table. Meanwhile, the card's motion continues, moving the blue piece towards the blue solid half. And once he lifts the ribbon, the illusion is perfectly accomplished. This gimmick, instead of having a face card at the bottom, has a red back. All he does with this gimmick is flip it over with his left hand to give the illusion of it turning into a red card. Notice that once he squares up the normal face red-backed cards on the table, he picks up the red card that he placed on the square last. This is because, although this red card has a red back, it has a black art face. As he attempts to deal it onto the table, it simply camouflages. However, he doesn't leave this gimmick there. Instead, he ditches it into the savant at the moment his hand contacts the table as he slides it towards himself. After this, he starts performing the snap deal, also known as the laser deal, which works similarly to the snap bottom deal. Here, the cards, after being apparently dealt, are gripped like this and then ditched into the savant at the very end. Now, to perform the second most impressive trick in his act, where the card physically vanishes and leaves behind only a small piece that is then restored visually, he once again utilizes black art. This is where he uses the magnet I mentioned earlier, implanted within the ribbon. Watch the movement of his left hand as he reaches to lift the ribbon. Notice him sliding something from the top right corner of the table towards the ribbon and placing it carefully where the magnet is located. This object is a rectangular piece of black-colored velvet, larger than a standard playing card. This black rectangular piece was not yet attached to the ribbon, but only positioned near it. After placing the card, you can see him clearly picking up the ribbon. At this point, he created slack in the ribbon, causing the ribbon to immediately attach to the piece and cover the blue-colored playing card. The purpose of placing his left hand above the ribbon was to cast a shadow and help conceal the black rectangular piece's movement. As the camera zoomed in, any moving black piece could have been noticeable, so he used the shadow cast by his hand to his advantage. This blue-colored card was also a gimmick. Notice the moment he attempts to pick up the card from the table. We see a sudden black shift on the table, suggesting black art underneath the card. This is because the blue card was gimmicked such that a portion of it was covered in black art. That portion was then concealed with a small piece of blue card and attached magnetically to disguise it. In a close-up shot of the card, you can see the diagonal line of this pre-cut piece. After displaying the small piece, he placed it back onto the base card and vanished it by simply tilting his left hand. He then slid it towards himself, allowing it to drop behind the table while faking the gesture of picking it up with his right hand. Remember from the previous trick that this particular blue card had a black face. In this next trick, he used it to transform the card into a coin. When he took a coin out of his left pocket and displayed it, his right hand was behind the table, grabbing a second coin and placing it behind the black-faced blue back card. He then dropped the blue card face up to vanish it, and once again ditched it behind the table while moving his hand towards the edge. He then picked up the remaining blue cards while simultaneously grabbing a stack of coins from behind the table in a coin holder. The coins were held in his left hand under the cover of the blue cards, tilted his wrist towards himself, allowing the cards to drop and leaving the coins behind. He tossed the coins onto the table, gathered them up, and placed them at the center of the table for a very specific reason. This is because the table is not ordinary. It is a specially designed electromechanical table that can switch out objects while using the black velvet to hide the edges of this rectangular slot. Notice how, when he picks up the blue card and places it on the right side of the table, he deliberately covers the center of the table, allowing the coins to be switched out for the cards. These cards then appear suddenly at the center of the table, which he spreads out. In order to turn these cards back into coins, he once again hides the mechanism. This time, he uses his left hand to cover the cards, but he accidentally flashes the mechanism. At this point, you can see the cards going down into the table. Once he feels that the coins have arrived, he tosses the coins to the other side, performing an incredibly clean switch. While gathering up the coins and apparently placing them inside the wooden box, he is simply ditching them all into the savant, and actually only places one real coin on top of the other fake coin shell. Notice that this box has a loose wooden rectangular frame between the hinges. This loose piece, in fact, attaches to the top of the lid when he opens it up again to show that the coins have apparently vanished. You can compare how the lid looked before and after the vanish and see that the fake coin shell is attached here. Rob Lake's body split illusion. Now, I know you've seen me explain many body split illusions in the past, but this one definitely stands out. It's quite impressive. The magician initially stands at the center of the stage while his assistant aims a laser at his waist, seemingly cutting it in half. After that, a chain comes down from above, which he grabs with both hands, and suddenly his torso appears to separate from his legs. His legs then walk freely on stage. Eventually, they return to their original position, and his body reattaches at the end. So how did Rob perform this illusion without using any traditional methods, like doing it undercover or inside a box? Here's the secret. Some of you may have seen the famous illusion by Kevin James, where he cuts his assistant in half, and the upper torso appears to be completely detached from the legs right out in the open. Now, for this illusion, the assistant is actually an amputee who doesn't have a lower body, similar to Criss Angel's famous body split illusion, which also used amputee subjects. I've covered that illusion on my channel as well, but in Rob's case, he isn't an amputee. So how is it possible that we can see all around him? Now, some of you who are regular viewers might recall my review of Xavier Mortimer's body split illusion, where his upper torso appears separated and is even placed on the ground. You might logically guess that Rob could have his knees tucked in just like Xavier did in his illusion. But in Xavier's case, notice that he's lying on the ground. The metal sheet he's holding underneath helps ensure his knees are pushed up. And at no point can we see behind him, making it difficult to judge his upper torso's thickness. Now, if we look at Rob's body, we can clearly see that if he were to fold his legs, there would be an enormous bump from his chest. It would be pretty obvious the moment he detached. Yet, we don't see any suspicious bump. Secondly, we can clearly see underneath him. And if you pay close attention to his position, trying to tuck in your knees while simultaneously grabbing onto those chains with both arms is not an easy task. It would put enormous stress on his body. But we can hardly see him struggling as he is being lifted up. So there's something we're missing. Let's zoom out and focus on his legs. There's something suspicious about them. At the beginning, his pants look like this, but after a camera angle change, they suddenly appear different. This suggests that some camera trickery has taken place to reposition his body and execute the illusion. In other words, what we see at the beginning, when he's standing normally, and what we see after the camera angle change, when he splits, are two entirely different situations. Since these legs can be seen walking, and judging by their thickness, there's no possible way someone could be hiding inside them, which means he's using bipedal robotic legs. Bipedal robotic legs are electromechanical limbs capable of maintaining balance and dynamically moving from one position to another without falling over. But even knowing that, we still haven't answered the key question. Where are Rob's real legs and how are they positioned? To answer this, let's refer back to the classics. Specifically, the woman's stomach disappearing illusion, which was revealed by the masked magician. The secret behind that illusion relies on the positioning of the upper and lower body. The upper body is actually lying horizontally with the top part hanging naturally to help cover the body from both the front and the side. Meanwhile, a wall behind helps complete the deception. Now, if Rob is also lying horizontally, why don't we see his legs? And why does it still look different from the woman's illusion? Well, in her case, she's stationary. But in Rob's illusion, he's moving upwards. Let's look at the environment where Rob is performing. First, notice how the back of the stage is very dark, and the lighting is only directed towards the front. Secondly, notice that his body is positioned closer to the back of the stage rather than the front. What's happening here is that his body is in the exact same position as the woman in the classic illusion, but he is lying on a platform that moves vertically, similar to how a forklift operates. Now to hide the remaining portion of his body, the entire section from his back to the wall is covered by black cloth. But this isn't just any black cloth. It's painted with Musu black, the world's blackest paint. The purpose of using such an ultra-black paint is to eliminate shadows, making it impossible to detect any shapes or details at a distance. Essentially, it hides the contours of his body as he lies horizontally on his chest. To see how well this paint works, let's take an example from the Action Labs channel. He painted an entire room with Muso black and shined a light above himself. As a result, you couldn't see anything around him. When he turned his face away from the light, his facial features and clothing completely disappeared in the darkness. And just to clarify, the light bulb he used wasn't dim. It was actually very bright. Now, looking back at the lighting in Rob's theater, it's directed only towards the front of his body, and the entire theater is very dark. Now comes the big question. While this setup makes sense for performing the illusion on camera where he can use a jump cut to exclude the part where he sets up his body, how would he be able to perform this illusion in front of a live audience? Because we do see audience reactions in some of these shots. Well, notice something important. We never actually see both Rob Lake and the audience in the same frame. That's because the reaction shots were taken from a different live performance. But let's assume he had to perform this trick live. How would he do it? He would have to use curtains. Now, what do I mean by that? Take a look at this performance on Penn and Teller's Fool Us, where a magician initially stands on stage while a curtain is down. Then, after giving an intro to his trick, he walks behind the curtain, gets into position, and only then is the curtain removed. Rob would use a similar method to get into the setup position before executing the actual movement when his body splits. And just in case you're wondering what illusion that magician performed, it was also another body split illusion. If you want me to explain how that trick is done, let me know in the comments. Young Min's incredible sand manipulation act on America's Got Talent. This manipulation act is personally my favorite, mainly because Young does not stick to traditional manipulation acts involving cards, candles, and balls. Here is what he did in his performance. Young starts the trick by scooping up some sand and instantly transforming it into a rod, then performs a vanishing and reappearing sequence. He produces the sand rod once again, which then visually transforms into sand. After this, he grabs a pinch of sand from thin air and creates a continuous flow from his closed fist, which he then splits into two. Following this, he seamlessly produces a large ring out of thin air and transforms it back into sand, bit by bit in slow motion, ending his incredible act. So how did he perform these incredible tricks? Here's the secret. I know most of you may have figured out the first trick he performed, where he produced the rod hidden in his left sleeve and carefully pulled it out. After that, he performs a temporary vanish, where he positions the rod horizontally. We can actually catch him flashing the position of this rod right here. So if viewed from Young's perspective, you could see that it is being pushed against his chest with his middle finger. He produces the rod by repositioning his fingers so that his thumb goes underneath it and flicks it forward. After that, we can see in the slowed down footage, it is easy to catch the rod being sleeved back into his left arm before a cloud of sand is launched from his left wrist. We do notice the opening in his left sleeve where the cloud of sand is released, but the question is, how exactly is this sand machine designed and installed within his cloak? I will address that at the end of the explanation. For the second trick, you can see him producing the rod out of his left sleeve again. But take note, if you look closely at this rod, compared to the ones before, you'll notice that they're not the same. In fact, this second one doesn't look like it contains sand at all. It appears to contain silver-colored glitter. You'll also notice a black tip on this rod near his left hand. When slowed down, you'll see that he twists the rod in the opposite direction with both of his fingers, releasing the glitter sand mixture and creating the incredible illusion. For those familiar with stage magic tricks, it may seem like a vanishing cane was used, which is a prop that's hollow inside and shrinks when twisted. However, what we saw in the slowed down footage of Young's performance doesn't resemble a vanishing cane at all. This is because it is a custom-designed prop created specifically for his trick. This prop is designed so that the front half is clear plastic, allowing the sand and glitter mixture to be visible, while the back half is black-colored plastic that covers the ends. By twisting the ends in opposite directions, the prop dismantles into two halves. First, the clear plastic piece falls off, allowing all the glitter and sand to escape, while the black back portion is let go. This all happens at once. Now that you know how this gimmick is constructed, you can actually see it being dismantled in slow motion. First, you catch a glimpse of the clear plastic piece falling, immediately followed by the sand and glitter mixture, and then the black half of the back right here. The black piece isn't visible because everything happens in one motion, and the sand and glitter hide it. However, since this plastic piece has mass, You can see upon hitting the stage floor that the sand jumps off, exposing the black rod near his foot in plain view. For the third trick, he grabs a thumb tip hidden on the outside of his cloak. Although the producers cut out the moment that would have exposed him stealing the thumb tip, his dirty hands left a patch on his left side, revealing where he had placed his left hand before the jump cut. This thumb tip is filled with a small amount of sand, which is released by slightly pushing it forward. You can see him doing exactly this with his left hand. This small amount of sand production helps misdirect the audience's attention from what he is doing with his right hand. Notice how his body turns to his side as his right hand grabs a cylinder filled with sand that has a small hole at the bottom. In this closer shot, you can catch a glimpse of that black cylinder. But a simple sand-filled cylinder does not explain how he was able to seamlessly break the stream of flowing sand in half, making it look like pure CGI. To understand this, watch his second performance on America's Got Talent where he repeats this trick. Notice that because of incorrect lighting, we are able to catch a glimpse of how exactly this sand-filled cylinder is designed. If we carefully zoom in, you'll notice that upon picking up the cylinder from the stage floor, a black spoon-like end connected to a thin wire is spotted right behind the flowing sand. By slightly tilting his hand back, the black scoop moves forward and disrupts the sand flow, making it appear as though the stream has been cut in half. Here's how the gimmick looks up close. The cylinder has a wire connected to it, with a miniature black-colored spoon at one end designed to camouflage with his black clothing. The sand flowing from his left hand is simply him filling his left fist with sand and then releasing it, perfectly timing it with the wire gimmick. The final trick in this performance may seem obvious at first, that he may have simply pulled the ring out of his cloak, but it becomes very confusing when we realize that the ring he initially revealed was only half a ring. Yet, as his left arm moves up, the other half of the ring appears out of nowhere. So what's going on here? Take a closer look at the complete ring. Notice that the left half of the ring is slightly larger than the right half. This left half, as you can see in this animation, hides inside the right half. Initially, when he pulled it out of his cloak, he was concealing only half of the ring. Once he had fully revealed that half, he positioned his left-hand fingers right above the ring, directly over the second nested ring, and began pulling it out. This allowed the incredible illusion of the full ring appearing. Knowing how this gimmick is constructed also explains how he was able to make the ring vanish in the end. You can clearly see the right half of the ring being carefully pushed into the left half, after which the entire gimmick is tucked into a large pocket inside his cloak. But what about the sand production device? How does that work? The main component is a small but powerful air blower that is strapped to his back hidden under his outfit. Attached to this blower is a sand reservoir, a flexible pouch filled with fine, dry sand. This pouch is positioned in a way that allows gravity to naturally feed the sand into the airflow when activated. A thin, flexible tube runs from this hidden setup through his sleeve, leading to a small nozzle we spotted near his left wrist. Now, to activate the blower, he uses a small switch placed near his foot as his hands are busy with the slides. David Blaine's teleporting card trick on Jimmy Fallon. I've covered the first part of David's performance on Jimmy Fallon's show in my previous video. Now, let's quickly recap the second card trick he performed. David Blaine began by dealing cards face up and asking the volunteers to count a total of 10 cards. To verify, one volunteer recounted them one by one. Next, he had Jimmy call stop as he dribbled the deck, landing on the 3 of diamonds. Blaine emphasized that only the number mattered and claimed he would teleport 3 cards from his deck into the volunteer's packet, which had been held against their chest the entire time. After riffling the deck 3 times, the volunteer felt something change. When they recounted, they now had 13 cards. The cards were gathered again, held against the chest. David Blaine then turned to the second volunteer and asked him to think of a number up to 10. He stated 3. Blaine then asked a third volunteer to think of a number up to 5. They chose 4. Adding, he stated he would now move 7 cards. This time, he sprung the deck toward the packet, and the volunteer felt it thicken. Upon recounting, the packet contained 20 cards. So how did Blaine teleport the cards right into his hands not once, but twice? The secret behind this trick, one might assume, was a gimmick deck, such that the cards were in pairs and attached with adhesive. But that's not the case here. In fact, it's just clever technique and wordplay to create the illusion of randomness. At the beginning, when he counts 10 cards onto the table, he purposely does so face-up. These face-up cards will soon have 3 additional cards loaded underneath them. Notice what David Blaine says at this moment.
We don't care about the number in the suit. We only care about the actual paper that makes the card.
Although it may seem like an innocent remark, where he states that the material itself, as in the cards, is what matters, not the values or suits. He is actually counting 3 cards from the top of the deck and catches a pinky break like this, under the guise of picking up the 10 cards from the table. he secretly loads the 3 extra cards underneath the packet before putting the deck back onto the table. David could have just picked up all 10 cards with his right hand, but the clever technique of sliding them off the table made it necessary to involve his left hand. Now, with 10 cards face up and 3 cards face down loaded at the bottom, this clever counting technique hides the extra 3 cards as he goes through all 10 and stops at the face down cards. With these 3 extra cards now placed against the volunteer's chest, we know logically that David has to force the number 3 onto Jimmy Fallon. He initially shows Jimmy that all the cards are different and dribbles them. Most of my viewers are familiar with basic card force techniques, including the dribble force, where a break is maintained ensuring that wherever the volunteer stops, the magician drops the remaining cards below the break, forcing the selection. But this contradicts what we see David Blaine doing. The contradiction arises because David is holding the deck by its diagonal corners with no visible break. That's because he does use the dribble force concept, but with a slightly different technique. In this case, he used a short card. The short card was the 3 of diamonds. A short card is a card that is trimmed slightly along the length or width, depending on its usage. In this case, it was trimmed along the width, like this. As a result, when dribbling through the cards, the short card acts as a break, but one that's practically invisible from any angle. So now that we know how he performed the first trick, what about the second trick? He doesn't use the same tricky counting method with the packet in the volunteer's hand. In fact, we can clearly see that the volunteer placed the cards on the table and scooped them up himself. So what's going on here? Let's rewind to the moment he demonstrates to the volunteer how to count the cards onto the table. Notice that David himself is counting the cards, and he counts a total of 7 cards during this demonstration. He does this to catch a pinky break right underneath them, like this. After that, he palms the 7-card packet in his right hand, and you can catch a glimpse of the palmed cards in this close-up shot of his right hand. While everyone is focused on counting the 13-card packet, David waits for the perfect moment. That moment is when they count to 10. As soon as the 10th card is placed on the table, he slaps the 7-card packet straight onto the mess in plain sight. After the cards are gathered up by the volunteer, everything is set up. Now David has to force the number 7 onto the volunteer. This is where clever wordplay is used. Since we know that only 7 cards were added, the only number he could really force was 7. To be honest, it's a combination of both multiple outs and forcing achieved through clever wording. Listen to his first statement.
Can you name a number up to 10?
His wording to the second volunteer may sound innocent, but it's actually a psychological suggestion designed to push them toward picking a higher number. A survey of over 8,000 students based on a Reddit data study on random number selection found that when asked to pick a number between 1 and 10, the most commonly chosen number was 7, followed by 3. In the case of David Blaine, he knew that 7 and 3 were the most commonly selected numbers. To make sure 7 was chosen, instead of saying pick a number between 1 and 10, which offers a broad range, he subtly reworded it as up to 10, encouraging participants to pick a higher number. However, since the volunteer chose 3, which is also a common selection, it wasn't the number David was aiming for. This is why he involves the third volunteer in a little addition game and states this.
And can you name a number up to 5?
Instead of asking them to pick a number up to 10, he limits it to 5, again, encouraging a higher number. The third volunteer then picks 4, bringing the total to 7. But what if the third volunteer had picked any other number? David Blaine has 2 ways to handle it. If they pick 3, he simply says, pick a different number since the first person already picked 3. If they pick 1, 2, or 5, David would change the situation entirely. He would turn to Jimmy and says, hey Jimmy, now you pick a number up to 10. Jimmy obviously can't pick 3, so the most common choice would be left is 7. Then David would ask, do you want to go with your decision or theirs? Most of the time, the final volunteer will prefer to stick with their decision. This number selection trick relies entirely on wordplay and common selections. There's no single direct method. It's all about having multiple outs. And David Blaine, being an experienced magician, knows exactly how to get out of tricky situations. Here's more evidence for your satisfaction.
Everybody has favorite numbers up to 10. They're always different. Say your favorite number up to 10. Say a number
5.
up to 10. Say your favorite number up to 10.
8.
Say your favorite number up to
7.
10.
Watch this performance, where he wants to force the number 7, since the first and second volunteers didn't pick small numbers that added up to 7, and it was the third volunteer that finally selected number 7. Here's how he handled the situation to filter out the selection.
But not on me. So
Okay.
say stop.
Stop.
On him or you? Was it him?
On Marc.
Yep, he resorted to a timing force at the end, which was fairly obvious. I've also covered how David handled a situation where he was trying to psychologically force the 7th card in my explanation of Marc FISM Act, which you can watch on my channel. In that case, the volunteer didn't go along with the plan, so David immediately switched to a backup. Eric's Rubik's Cube act on Asia's Got Talent. Eric begins the trick by pouring chocolate into a glass bowl. He then starts filling his left hand when all of a sudden, a Rubik's Cube falls out. He asks a spectator to mix up the Rubik's Cube and cover it with their hand for now. He then cups his hand, fills it with chocolate, and upon pouring it onto the table, a large cube suddenly appears. He solves it in an instant by shaking it. After this, he asks the spectator to lift their hand, revealing that the Rubik's Cube they have been holding is now magically solved as well. He then covers the solved Rubik's Cube with his right hand while shifting focus to the large one in his left hand. Suddenly, the miniature Rubik's Cube transforms entirely into chocolate. He then takes the large cube, smashes it onto the table, and upon impact, it instantly transforms into chocolate as well. Now, the explanation for this trick is quite simple yet clever. The initial cube production required a quick load into his right palm, which happened the moment he went behind the table to pull out the bottle. The bottle he held helped hide the palmed cube behind it in the same hand as he poured out the chocolate. He flashed that very palmed cube here when he removed the bottle. He then subtly readjusts his grip to prevent the palmed cube from slipping out, reaches into the chocolate bowl to grab a few chocolates, and discreetly transfers the cube from his right hand to his left. He continues to flash it briefly before finally producing it. For the next trick, as he places his hand over the mixed-up cube and transfers it to the volunteer host, he executes a very clever move. To fully understand this, we need to take a closer look at the table. Notice near the top right area of the table, there is a large square cutout, along with a relatively smaller square cutout near the center right here. What you are seeing here isn't some random pattern. This is no ordinary table, but a specially designed gimmick table that allows objects to be switched out seamlessly. In this exposed demonstration, we can see how this mechanism works. After taking the mini cube, you can see he places it precisely on the square near the center of the table. The moment he covers it, he activates the switching mechanism, replacing the original mixed-up cube with a solved miniature cube before transferring it under the host's hand. Following this, he grabs some chocolates and drops them at the top right corner of the table, right where the cutout we spotted earlier is located. At this point, you may have already caught on as to what is about to happen. This large Rubik's Cube popped out from the base of the table using that same switching mechanism. This also explains why, as the cube appeared, the chocolate started flying upwards and away from its origin. This large Rubik's Cube he produced may look like an ordinary one, but in fact, he specially prepared and gimmicked it in a way that allows him to instantly solve it by waving it. Here, he doesn't require an extreme level of dexterity to solve it in one hand. This is because it is designed in such a way that allows him to solve it instantly by shaking it. Contrary to what it seems, no extreme dexterity is required. If we look closely at the moment he shakes the cube side to side, we can spot a flap mechanism subtly moving upwards in one frame. This mechanism works by simply twisting two segments of the cube, which is the only actual finger movement required. Each of the flaps show a mixed pattern on one side and a solved color pattern on the other. Other than that, the cube solves itself as the flaps automatically fall into place. With the audience now focused on the solved miniature cube, his left hand moves behind the table. Right here is when he swaps the flapped gimmick cube for another specially prepared cube that will serve as the final trick in his act. But before he gets to the final trick, he covers the miniature cube with his right hand, secretly switching it out for a chocolate cube before revealing the transformation. Now for the grand finale, the chocolate cube that he had switched earlier from behind the table is smashed onto the table. Upon impact, it opens up in such a way that the inside faces of the hollow cube, which are entirely black, blend seamlessly into the black surface of the table, as you can see in this illustration. This clever camouflage effect makes it appear as though the large cube has really turned into the chocolates, concluding his incredible performance. DMC's best card trick. This is arguably one of DMC's best card tricks, one that many have seen and tried to work out the method behind. He begins the trick by folding a playing card into an origami toad, and as he does, he says that a toad symbolizes magic due to its life transformations from egg to tadpole to toad, earning a reputation as a magician, mind reader, and an escape artist. He then unfolds the card, revealing that it is the Ace of Hearts. He folds it back up and hands it to the spectator, asking her to give it a name. She reaches into the deck, pulls out a card, and holds the toad near her ear, pretending to listen to what card it is. She says it's the Jack of Spades, and it turns out she is correct. He places her card back into the deck, gives it a few cuts, and starts dealing the card slowly onto the table. He tells her she can call out stop whenever she likes. She stops on the 10th card, and he shows one card above and one card below it to prove that she had a genuinely free choice and could have selected a different card if she had stopped slightly earlier or later. Upon flipping over the selected card, It turns out to be the Jack of Spades. He then takes the Jack of Spades, flips it over, and upon touching her hand, the Jack of Spades and the Ace of Hearts switch places. Finally, for the toad's last magical transformation, DMC asks her to place the toad into her hand. With a subtle blow, he brings the toad to life. So how did he perform this amazing card trick? Here is the secret. This trick, to make it look a lot better on TV, required a little bit of pre-show work. Now, this pre-show work was only to force the Jack of Spades to be her selected card. For those who are not familiar with pre-show work, pre-show doesn't mean the spectator is a stooge in any way. In fact, the purpose of it is to use the concept of dual reality in mentalism, where the volunteer, when asked to think of something, understands your command in one way, while the rest of us interpret it as it is. In this case, before the camera started running, DMC had her select a card from inside the deck, giving her the impression that she could freely select any card, whereas he ended up forcing her selection and asked her to keep it as her selected card in mind, so that when the camera starts running, no one will know what her card is except her. In simpler words, the trick started before the camera even began rolling. Now, in her mind, she knows her selected card is the Jack of Spades, whereas the statement DMC gives on camera makes us believe she had the free choice to select any one of the 52 cards in the deck, when that's not the case. The same pre-show concept is used by David Blaine in his card trick with Harrison Ford, when he asked him to think of any card in the deck, and that card teleported and appeared inside an orange. In reality, the orange had already been prepared with the card to be forced hidden inside it. And before the camera started rolling, he forced Ford into selecting that particular card. We don't get the full context and end up believing that Harrison genuinely had a free choice to select any card. That card was already removed from inside the deck before the camera started rolling, when he handed it over to him for examination. The moment he said to grab a piece of fruit and specified one that we can open up.
Grab a piece of fruit for me, like one that we can open up.
You notice that only one orange is sitting separated from all the others. Knowing how pre-show is used to force the Jack of Spades still doesn't explain how she managed to select this exact card from the spread. But wait, if you pay attention to the moment he goes through the cards face up, he only shows 6 cards from the bottom of the deck and hides the remaining ones underneath. Yes, the remaining 46 cards inside this deck are all the Jack of Spades. This is why, as long as she reached near the center or the top of the deck, she was absolutely fine. Furthermore, his subtle gesture of pointing near the center and saying, just pull one card out, is a psychological way to get them to reach for a card near the center of the spread. But in the next trick, where she is given the option to call out stop at any point as he deals the cards, and she stops him at the 10th card, which is the Jack of Spades, we immediately notice a contradiction with the first method. This is because he actually showed one card below and above the freely selected card. To understand what's going on here, you need to notice the thickness of this deck right after he squares up the spread from the first trick. The size of the deck is relatively larger because he has added a packet of around 15 cards to the top, which helps him in this trick. This packet of cards is arranged such that every alternating card is a Jack of Spades with random cards in between. Every even-numbered card is a Jack of Spades. The term numbers here refers to their positions from the top of the deck. The pace at which DMC deals the cards is under his control. For example, let's say the spectator calls out stop at an odd number. He would deal that card onto the table and then take the next even-numbered card and say that it's her selection. This also explains why he can show one card below it and above it, but can't show all the remaining cards. None of these cards were dealt face up to genuinely prove there were no other Jack of Spades in the deck. And if you pay attention to when he slid the card apparently into the center of the deck before cutting it several times, he actually placed it about 15 to 20 cards deep in the deck. Some may suggest that because of those cuts, it moved to the 10th position. But in reality, that was a false cut that kept the sequence of the entire deck exactly the same, as in the packet he loaded on top of the deck remained on top. Follow the sequence of the deck in these 3 cuts carefully. The top packet, after being cut, is placed at the bottom. The second packet is taken from the very bottom of the deck. The third packet was right above this bottom packet. When he squares up the center packet, he catches a pinky break, places the bottom 2 packets on the table, and the top packet is now back on top. Therefore, the sequence of the deck was never altered. In the next trick, where the Jack of Spades switches places with the Ace of Hearts, 2 switches are required. The first switch is performed using a double lift. The Ace of Hearts is right underneath the Jack of Spades, and when he flips both cards over together, he leaves the Jack of Spades on top of the deck. But the question is, how did he switch the origami toad? Some may suggest that the switch happened right at the beginning of the performance, when he folded it up and handed the toad over to her. Unfortunately, that would be the worst explanation. We can clearly see uncut footage. From the moment he displays the Ace of Hearts, folds it up, and hands it to her, that there was no moment where a switch could have taken place. But at no point after handing over the toad did he instruct her to hold it in her left hand throughout the performance. This means the switch had taken place right after the first trick was completed. There are multiple ways to perform a folded card switch. Here are two examples that utilize the ditching mechanism, involving palming and ditching the folded card into the savant. Keep in mind that DMC is performing this for the camera and has control over post-production. The portion of the switch was simply removed from the footage to make the trick look more impossible. For the final illusion, where the origami toad is turned into a real one, you can see his hands are initially empty. However, after folding up the jack of spades, there is a camera angle change and his fists are closed. Although it may appear as if this is continuous footage, in reality, his right hand went behind the table, pulled out a toad from his savant and held it in his right fist. After the origami toad was placed in his left hand, he simply ditched it behind the table as he tilted his head toward himself and revealed the real toad in his right hand. David Copperfield's famous plane vanish illusion. Copperfield begins the trick by introducing a large jet that has lights positioned behind it to project a shadow when the panels go up. The jet is surrounded by 50 volunteers who are all blindfolded and holding hands together while Copperfield ties the jet with two straps on opposite ends. Then the front two panels are positioned to hide the jet while Copperfield turns on the light behind it, casting a shadow and convincing us of its presence in the enclosed area. He locks the panels, and as soon as the light goes off, the jet is nowhere to be seen. Now, of course, we know he didn't just make the plane vanish. This is a trick, after all, and the plane simply has to be positioned somewhere else where it's not visible. This immediately draws attention to what's outside the panels, specifically the time of day when the trick is performed. What's with David Copperfield performing large object vanishes, like the Statue of Liberty, at night? And why this jet disappearance as well? And to add to this, the only reason we can see the jet is because of these few light sources strategically positioned on the opposite sides of the jet. Had the plane been repositioned somewhere in any of the dark areas, we wouldn't be able to see it simply because the jet wasn't running. Well, of course, they couldn't keep it running, as there are people surrounding it. At this point, the explanation for this trick becomes very obvious. I know some of you are questioning whether the plane was real or a fake cardboard cutout. You can actually see from the beginning of the footage a close-up shot all around it, proving its legitimacy. That it actually exists there, which means we need to know exactly how he moved the plane. Now, he couldn't have started the plane for two reasons. First, the people standing dangerously close to the jet engine. And second, we would hear where it was going, and so would everyone surrounding it. For those who have traveled by plane, you might have noticed vehicles called airport tugs, which move planes by attaching to one of the tires. You can clearly see these tugs have the potential to move entire Boeing and Airbus planes. So considering the size of the jet, it could easily be moved by a standard airport tug. So this plane tug was positioned right near the back panel in the darkness, but to allow the plane to escape, these panels had to be moved. Not only that, this particular group of people standing at the back while holding hands also had to be moved. In other words, they were part of the illusion as assistants but acted as volunteers, unlike the others standing against the three faces. These three sets of volunteers only existed there with their blindfolds on for the testimony at the end of the trick. And secondly, wearing blindfolds also explains why they wouldn't know who is really in on the trick and how exactly the plane is moved. Here's how they would execute the illusion. These two back panels open up like gates because you can see they have wheels at the bottom right over here. These two separate panels open up, giving enough room for the plane to be pulled out from the front wheel, as you can see in this animation. But we're not done yet. What about the plane's shadow? How come we're able to see the shadow? And within a second, after the lights turn off, the plane vanishes. Of course, pulling such a large jet with such speed isn't physically possible without safety hazards and giving away the illusion in a mishap, which means the shadow can't be a real-time projection of the plane. So what you're seeing here is just a fake plane shadow. Notice that David Copperfield didn't turn on the lights before the panels were lifted. He only turned them on after the panels had blocked the view of the plane, indicating that inside both of these panels was an opaque cloth stitched within them that looked something like this in both of these halves. But here's an issue with this explanation. David Copperfield mentioned the light source that will cast the shadow on the panels was positioned behind the plane, and he even showed it in the beginning. So if that's the case, we would actually be seeing two shadows, one of the opaque cloth stitched inside the panels and one true shadow from the plane that would be relatively larger because of the light source being very close. Well, you see, the assistants near the back wall had another job. First, they had to move out of the way, and second, they had to reposition these lights from behind the plane to the front so that when David Copperfield turned the light on, only one shadow would appear on the front panels, the fake one. So by simply manipulating the lighting, subtle misdirection, gimmick panels and a plane tug, he was able to vanish the plane in terms of magic, when in reality he simply repositioned it into darkness. The time-traveling magician on America's Got Talent. Jasper begins the trick by having Heidi call out "stop" as he riffles through the deck to select a card, which in her case was the 5 of spades. He asked her to place it face up in the spread, and everyone was requested to remember this particular moment where all the cards were face down, except for her selected card. He then took the card out of the spread and shuffled the cards such that half of them were face up and half were face down, mixing them together to create a mess. Heidi was then asked to insert her selected card face down into the spread. Jasper fanned out the cards and took a photo with her phone. He then said, "Let's travel back in time 5 minutes," as he showed the clock on his phone, counted backward 5 minutes, and asked everyone to check their phones to verify that this event actually happened. He explained that since they were now 5 minutes back in time, the deck of cards was never shuffled. He then showed all the cards to be face down, except for Heidi's card. Taking it to the next level, he asked her to look at the photo on her phone, which also showed only Heidi's card in the fan. The explanation for this trick is pretty straightforward and doesn't require much sleight of hand. But the fact that he was able to manipulate the time on everyone's phone was the most impressive part of the trick. For the first trick, he begins by performing a riffle force, where the force card, in this case, the 5 of spades, is placed on top of the deck. The deck is then cut, so the 5 of spades is positioned right below his pinky break, which looks something like this. So he tells Heidi she can call out "stop" anywhere. It doesn't really matter because you can clearly see he cuts far deeper into the deck than where Heidi originally called "stop." The point at which they call out "stop" never matters, as you are handling the deck. But the trick doesn't end there, as this particular deck of cards also contains gaff cards. This is because when he spreads the deck on the table, the top half consists of double backers. The purpose of these double backers is to create the illusion of a messy shuffle. But how exactly? See, when he apparently shuffles face-up cards into face-down cards, the mess is only visible when the deck is spread one way. If the deck is flipped and spread the other way, all the face-up cards will appear face down, while the double backers will always remain face down. This is why Heidi is asked to push her card face down into the messy spread, so that her card appears face up when the deck is spread the other way. This also explains why, when he handed the fan to Heidi to hold, the messy side of the fan was facing her, while the other side, showing only the 5 of spades from the magician's perspective, was positioned for the photo. After taking back the cards from Heidi, he flips over the deck, so all the cards now appear face down, preparing for the apparent time-traveling trick. But how did he manage to change the time on everyone's phone? Well, he didn't. He simply changed the time on his phone only. He uses a time manipulation app installed and set up on his phone. This app alters the lock screen clock, allowing several minutes to be added or subtracted from the current time. In this case, 5 minutes were added to the real time, and after a 3-second delay, the clock began counting backward by 5 minutes. Only then did everyone check their phone clocks. Pretty clever trick, but giving credit where it's due, this trick was created by Patrick Kuhn and is called Timeline. If you're interested, you can purchase this app for your phone. Marc Spelmann's Golden Buzzer-winning act on America's Got Talent. In his act, he performed 4 tricks, each involving a different choice. The first involved David selecting a random colored crayon from a box containing various options. The second required Alicia to freely select any playing card with different animals on it. While these selections were being made, Amanda continued to mix up a Rubik's Cube, which was then taken back from her and placed inside a purple box. Finally, Simon was asked to call out "stop" at any moment as the book was flipped through, then had him position the permanent marker pointing upward and circle any part of the page. He was then instructed to remember whatever word he had freely circled. The act concluded with a prediction played on the big screen, showing his daughter seemingly knowing everything beforehand by giving hints through her random videos. So how did his daughter know everything ahead of time? Here is the secret. In the first trick, he had David select one out of several different colored crayons that he openly showed in the beginning. But after closing the box and shaking it, he had him make a selection without looking. Watch this moment very carefully. Although he shows the box, which apparently contains different colored crayons, he closes it and then shakes it to mix up the order. But this was only an excuse to flip the box, as the box actually contained 2 sections, one with random colors, the other containing all reds. This is why he had David pick out the red crayon from the red section without looking. In the next trick, he showed all the cards to be different. However, after turning the cards over, he had her touch any card but did not allow her to pull it straight out. Instead, he picked it up from the deck himself and placed it in her hand. The reason he did this is because although this looks like a normal deck of cards, it is, in fact, specially prepared such that each card is a pair. If you were to take one of those cards from the deck, you'd notice that the back of each card is attached to the penguin card with roughing spray. The use of the rough and smooth concept, which Marc utilized in this trick, is also commonly used in invisible decks, where the cards are paired back-to-back and only split apart when you loosen the grip between the cards. If Marc had Alicia pull the card out of the deck herself, she would have ended up pulling the pair straight out and found 2 cards in her hand. So he had to carefully handle the part of handing the card to her. The third trick, involving the Rubik's Cube, uses an ordinary cube. Amanda really did form a random pattern on the Rubik's Cube. But if it isn't obvious by now, when he placed the Rubik's Cube inside the purple box, the box contained a shell that covered up the original pattern Amanda made. When she was asked to remove the purple box, the original pattern was no longer visible. If you think about it, why place the Rubik's Cube inside the purple box in the first place, only to remove it a few seconds later? Another clever move by the show's editors can be observed here. The side of the cube that remained unchanged due to the 4-sided shell facing the stage was not shown. Instead, they used a top-angle view from the judge's perspective to conceal any gaps that might be visible between the real mixed-up cube and the shell placed on top. Finally, the fourth trick with the word selected from the book. When he asked Alicia to close her eyes and call out stop at any moment, she never really had a free choice. He simply flipped to the page he always intended to flip to. His is also known as the timing force, after which he immediately turned the book face down. The magician aligns their actions with the expected response to achieve the predetermined outcome seamlessly. The reason he stopped on a specific page is that there was already a word circled on that page. Now, you may be wondering, when he had Simon circle a word, wouldn't there be 2 words circled? The trick is that Simon didn't circle anything because the marker he was holding had a dry tip. He on purpose positioned the book exactly where he wanted to, above the tip, to give the illusion that Simon freely circled that word at that exact position on the page. Dynamo's famous lottery tickets to money illusion. Dynamo picks up ordinary lottery tickets from the shelf, folds them in half, and with a quick tap, all the lottery tickets turn into bills. He then hands them over to the spectator, proving them to be real bills. But how did he perform this trick? Here is the secret. Now, I know what you all are thinking. He must be holding the bills underneath the lottery tickets and just flips them over with sleight of hand. But if you pay attention to the moment, the change happens in slow motion. There appears to be more to this illusion than just hiding folded up bills underneath. The moment of change happens way too fast even in the slowed down footage. At this point, many will conclude he's using camera tricks again, but that's not the case. In fact, he's using a very cleverly designed gimmick. Here's how the gimmick looks like. This gimmick not only has to hide the folded bills inside the lottery tickets, but also has the capability to be shown on both sides before and after the change. But where exactly is this gimmick, and how do you even use it? Notice how his hands are empty as he begins handing lottery tickets to the volunteer. However, when the camera shifts and his right hand reaches for a 3rd ticket, his left hand suddenly holds a 4th ticket that was never seen coming from the shelf. That's because this is the loaded gimmick that contains the dollar bills inside, which he took out from the front pocket of his jacket. If we were to snatch this gimmick from Dynamo's left hand at this moment, here is how it would look like after opening it up. Notice how it has 4 flaps, where 2 of those flaps show lottery tickets, and the other 2 show the bills, and the folded regular bills are loaded right over here. The second bottom flap is also folded so that all 3 flaps of this gimmick, alongside the bills, are positioned in his hand like this. This allows him to turn the gimmick the other way around and freely show both the face and the back without flashing anything. After that, Dynamo squares up the 4 lottery tickets right on top of this gimmick and folds them in half. This ensures that when the change happens, the lottery tickets are perfectly hidden inside the gimmick. Afterward, you can see Dynamo carefully inserting his finger in between the bills and getting into the ready position for the transformation. After inserting his finger in between the folded bills, he makes sure to use his left hand to ensure these 2 flaps remain folded, so the normal bills at the bottom don't get exposed yet. In order to perform the change, he needs a little help from magnets. Inside these 2 flaps are 2 thin neodymium magnets. With a flick, this flap moves right above the opposite flap. As a result, it instantly reveals the bill-faced side of the gimmick on top. This explains why, right after the tap, his right thumb appears to be underneath the top bill after the transformation for a moment. He then immediately turns over the gimmick so that the real bills come on top, in case the spectator tries to snatch it, and it also draws less attention to the flap gimmick as it is now underneath all the real bills. After the change is complete, here is the position of the folded lottery tickets in the flap gimmick. Shin Lim's impossible vanishing marker trick. While performing a card trick, the magician asked a randomly selected audience member to join him on stage. She used a marker to write on a card before handing it back to him. Then, in the blink of an eye, the pen completely disappeared into thin air. So, how did he pull off this trick? Here's the explanation. The trick was so well executed that it even fooled Penn and Teller. Penn admitted,
"We didn't even know how you vanished, marker."
The first step of the trick is subtle but crucial. Shin holds the marker at both ends using his fingers. Then, he cleverly uses his left hand to cover his right hand, which is holding the marker. Now, to keep the pen hidden from the audience, he employs a sleight of hand technique called the retention vanish. This involves turning the marker inward toward himself while gripping it with his thumb and middle finger. Next, pay close attention to his gaze. At this point, Shin glances down toward the inner right side of his waistcoat. This is a key moment. He's preparing to flick the marker into his jacket pocket. Now, to do this, he uses his index finger, which is closest to the tip of the marker, to push it quickly and forcefully. The momentum causes the pen to shoot straight into the hidden pocket of his waistcoat. When he dramatically opens his hands to show that the pen has vanished, it's already safely tucked away inside his jacket. And that's all for today. Till then, check out my other videos on the channel.